Welcome back to r/neighbors from hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors. And if you're new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. This story is titled HOA towed my truck and crushed it. I almost bankrupted the HOA. I have read plenty of stories on here about the HOA abusing rules, making up rules, and even just totally ignoring rules. This story is a little bit different because it is not about me fighting them on their bylaws, but instead it is about how they messed with me and soon found out that it was the worst decision of their life. Now, if you want to know what they hated so badly to start an entire war over it, it was just a single truck. Seems totally harmless, I know, but they had a certain idea of how a neighborhood would look, so my hobby of fixing up old trucks and cars seemed to just be too dirty for them. There was no rule against it though, so too bad for them, right? But wrong. They thought taking matters into their own hands using the HOA funds would be a smart move. Now, before you think that my yard is full of car parts and half-broken scrapes, let me give you a picture. My hobby is repairing these trucks, but I have a strict internal rule of only doing one at a time. Otherwise, I know that I will get myself confused and probably take on more than I can handle. I use my garage for all of my work and everything is stored in there. The only time that the truck leaves the garage is at night when I switch it out to put my everyday car in it. All the parts, tools, etc. stay inside of the house. The truck sits in the driveway until morning, where I swap it back into the garage again. Probably one of the neatest setups for people that repair old cars. I have limited space though, and I respect the fact that it would look really crappy if my small yard was just full of junk. Still, it being out at night just was not good enough for them, and they wanted that old truck gone. This one was from the 50s and I had been spending months trying to get it up and running again. It was a challenge and I was loving every minute of it. When I came outside to see that it was just gone, my eyes almost bugged out of my face because I thought it was stolen. I was going to call the police when I noticed in my mailbox was a letter from the HOA talking about them having an unusual and suspicious vehicle towed off my property. They had a number and I called them right away to give them a piece of my mind. Even if they didn't know the truck was mine, which they did, they had no right to just remove it off my property. I called them and they acted all shocked and sorry about the error, and I was able to get my truck back in mostly the same condition as I left it. I was angry, but I knew there was not much I could do about it, so I let it go. Lo and behold, a few days later, it was missing yet again, and I called the HOA and the tow company again. This time though, they admitted that the HOA told them the truck needed being crushed urgently and even got paid extra to do it as a rushed job. The truck had only been towed away about an hour and a half before. It was clear they wanted the truck gone for good this time. What they didn't know was that by destroying it, they made a huge enemy out of me. I was not going to just sit and take this, and instead I was going to fight them back. I was going to hit them where it would hurt them the most, their wallets. I called up everyone I knew that fixed trucks and asked them if they had any trucks that they gave up on and were not fixable. I did not tell them why because I didn't want them to get into any trouble, but at the end I had about 20 trucks at my disposal. The great thing about where I live is that there is no street parking allowed overnight, so when everybody goes to bed, the streets are nice and empty. I spent hours placing all of the trucks along the street, so now it would really be a bother. That was not enough for me though, and I took a blowtorch at every single one and burned all the easy contact points for a tow truck to move it. Now only a special kind of tow truck would be able to get rid of them, and I know for a fact that those cost a lot more money for the person paying for the towing. Nobody knew it was me, and I went back home to wait until the panic that would ensue come morning. Of course, nobody on the block liked what was in front of their house, and they were all calling the HOA and complaining that they better get these trucks off of the street. No HOA wants an angry mob coming after them, and they quickly called the tow company to get it taken care of. Like I said before, they needed to use a special truck and they only had one of them, so it took many trips for all of the trucks to be towed away from the block. Each one costing a ton of money that I don't have the exact numbers on, unfortunately. This revenge was so sweet, and the best part was the HOA obviously knew it was me, but they had no proof and could not really do anything about it. Even if they knew it was me, the worst they could do is give me a fine and try to push the cost of towing on me. However, without proof like the trucks having a license plate registered to me, it was their responsibility to pay for it. Even though I did not know the exact cost of things, I knew that they were in trouble once they started asking people for donations and trying to set up fundraisers to get more money. They tried to vote to raise HOA fees, but that got rejected and they cannot even try again for another year. It was clear that they were close to total bankruptcy from having to tow all of those trucks. They hated me for it, but they were the ones that started it by having my 1954 truck crushed instead of just letting me work on restoring it. This is basically the end of the story, but there's one last thing that I find too interesting not to share. Once the HOA did not have money anymore, it was very clear that certain houses suddenly started living a bit more within their means. To put it bluntly, the people on the board of the HOA seemed to have been skimming money off the top, and once they lost all that money, they couldn't really do that anymore. This is only my observation and I have no actual evidence that they were doing this. It could have just been the most perfectly timed coincidence ever. As for me though, I got another truck in my garage that I am working on, and I have a feeling that they are not going to try and tow this one if they don't want to lose the rest of their money. And yeah, Ripe Stars, it just seems that if you have any sort of interesting hobby, the HOA probably has something against it. Either way, if you have ever lived in an HOA yourself, please feel free to share your own stories either in the comments or on r/Ripe Stories on Reddit. Thank you very much in advance. Neighbors throw a fit. I put a fence up, hence denying their grandkids a place to stay. This has been an ongoing issue and had been a big issue since it snowed here recently. Long story short, my neighbors have temporary custody of their 4 grandkids, 8, 6, 4 and 2, give or take, after their son was arrested for arson and their daughter-in-law flew the coop. My 3 roomies and I have 2 dogs that enjoy to play in the yard, but it has recently become unsafe when they began the construction in front of our house. Due to that, people won't use the main street and decide to drive up and down the alley. Meaning these people will drive into people's yards to get out of the way of other vehicles instead of being patient and waiting at the end of the alley. I actually had a Mexican standoff one day with a guy who pulled into the middle of my driveway and would not move, so people were annoyed. I could not get home. What the F am I supposed to do? Anyways, my roomies and I said enough is enough, measured our yard, got the okay from the borough and built a fence. Because it was right on the property line, my neighbor had come over to confront us. He is asking why we are building a fence and asking if we made sure it was okay with the borough first. I said we did, and we did not like people driving up into the yard anymore to get out of the way of other cars. Plus, we did not want anyone to hit our dogs if they were playing outside. He then gets all huffy that how are his grandkids supposed to play outside now with us blocking off our yard. He went on a 15-minute rant about how us, young kids, all of us are in our mid/late 20s, are ruining things for his grandchildren. First off, my friends and I never agreed to the kids playing in the yard, nor did we have any knowledge of it. Now knowing the information, what was stopping my neighbor from claiming my roomies and I had hurt the kids while playing in the yard. My neighbor stormed out without me getting a word in and has been complaining about the fence all summer, and now it is winter, has been complaining since the snow began. How am I not allowing these kids to have a childhood? I don't get how it is my fault that they took on these kids and don't have a yard and expect me to share mine. So far, other than them vandalizing my fence and throwing stuff over it into my yard, nothing bad has happened yet. But I will keep you updated if anything happens. And a user in the comments said, this is the type of person to sue you if the kids get hurt while playing/trespassing on your yard. And it actually works. You likely would have to pay a sign or 3 saying no trespassing is a good consideration. And another user said, I had a similar experience with an antagonistic neighbor and their entitled brats throwing crap over our fence. They would throw rocks, food, broken toys, etc. We talked to them until we were blue in the face and their only response was, maybe if you were nicer, their kids, would not throw rocks at your house. Mind you, we had never done a damn thing to them. I had finally had enough when the rocks they threw were getting bigger and bigger and I called the police non-emergency line. I explained the situation and asked that a cop come over and let the kids know that this was not cool. And it worked, but my god, the crap the parents pulled after that was epic petty. They would park their cars in front of our house so we could not park there, had liquor-fueled parties until the wee hours, etc. People just suck sometimes. And really guys, if you own property, how dare you not let the neighbor kids play on your property, aka trespass on your property. You are clearly stealing their childhood. Really, I don't know guys, sometimes the audacity some people have and just being this level of entitled still makes me speechless. And the next one is titled, Chad calls the cops because the wife was mowing. This happened yesterday. This is more meant as a story than a request for advice, but any advice is welcome. Backstory, we live on a corner lot, the long side of our lot is fairly open, so we obtained permission to plant some trees along the nature strip. They've been in the ground about 12 months and are just starting to get established. A young guy, let's call him Chad, I don't know his real name, who lives across the street seems to have recently bought a Ram 3500. Not wanting to park it in front of his own house, presumably because it's so big, he has decided that he wants to park it along our property line. Normally that would not be an issue, except that he appears to want to park it directly opposite the front of his house and on the wrong side of the road and keeps opening his driver door into the establishing trees. My wife used to park her car in our garage, but in order to protect the trees, she is taken to parking it on the street next to them, so as to prevent Chad from parking his massive truck next to and opening his driver door onto them. Chad is clearly angry and petty about not being able to park his truck wherever and however he wants. One time we headed out to go pick up something in the wife's car, we noticed Chad has parked his truck nose to nose with the wife's car. Whatever. We get in, drive off and get to the end of the road and realize we have forgotten something. We turn back to the house and within that 2 minutes, Chad has run out of his house, started his truck up and driven it 1 car length down to where the wife's car was and parked it there, opening his door onto the small tree again before running back inside. We are in a rush and don't want to be confrontational and pick up the item and drive off again. This establishes the sort of guy Chad is though. The incident: my wife is mowing the lawn yesterday afternoon. She really enjoys doing garden work and fusses me away anytime I try to help. It is okay, I do all the other handyman projects around the house and she is happy, so it is an arrangement that works for us. Anyway, the wife is mowing the nature strip. She had already mowed most of the front lawn and the nature strip was the last thing to do. Chad pulls up in his truck at this exact moment, nose to nose with the wife's car, gets out and leaves his door wide open, and goes to fiddle with his jet ski that he leaves on the street parked behind his truck. And guys, here you can see the parked cars and the jet ski in question. Now, the lawnmower does not throw grass. It does not have a catcher, but it doesn't have a thrower either. The grass is cut and just drops straight down under the blades. In the picture you will notice a distinct lack of grass on the roadside of the curb. And yes, there is some on the footpath because my wife mowed that edge with the mower half on the lawn, half on the path, but if you look at the gutter curbside where she runs the wheels along the top of the concrete curb, there's next to zero grass at all on the road. Anyway, Chad has his door open for 5 minutes while he was fiddling about with his jet ski despite seeing my wife already starting on the nature strip. My wife had waited and waited for this guy to close his door, but despite him seeing her there waiting with the mower, he didn't, and as you can see clearly by the picture and the lack of grass thrown on the road and how far from the curb he is parked, she thought it would be a pretty safe idea to mow the strip past his open door. Right? Wrong. She gives up waiting and runs the mower along the strip past his truck. No grass got in his truck, but her doing this set him off like a rocket, and he's yelling at her.
This is Texas. This is America. You couldn't wait 2 minutes before kicking a whole lot of grass into my truck.
And blah blah blah. I should point out that my wife is American and I am Australian. We have a blended Aussie/US flag in front of our house, but this guy does not seem to understand that that is what it is and apparently assumes we are from Russia or something, and he keeps on ranting about
how we do things differently here.
Clearly this angry young guy was looking for any justification to spit the dummy and feel justified for going full frothy mouthed. My wife calls me out and she walks away to go find the edge trimmer. After listening to him for about 30 seconds, I did not want to listen to his crap any longer either, so I just turned away, restarted the lawnmower and ignored him. He then yells out he's calling the police. I say, go right ahead mate, and move away. When the officer arrived, he was mostly switching between trying to look professional and stifling a smile/laugh at the ridiculousness of it all. My wife asked if she should have just pushed his door shut. The officer laughs and says, "No, better not do that, or he might call me out again reporting that you're trying to steal his truck." We chat for a bit and the officer notices Chad's jet ski is not locked up and says that Chad must be pretty naive as there's been some vehicle thefts in the area lately and an unlocked jet ski complete with a trailer hitch is a very easy target. The officer also points out how badly Chad has parked his truck and on the wrong side of the road and says he will issue a warning to Chad to park properly in the future. Officer thanks us for our time and departs, both shaking his head and chortling to himself over the silly call-out. Conclusion: I personally suspect Chad left the door open in an attempt to create a situation he could escalate on purpose because my wife's car is parked right where he wants his to be parked. He was itching for any excuse to cause a fuss and to feel justified in doing so. We had actually ordered security cameras a few weeks back and they arrived yesterday as well, so we will be installing them ASAP. They have audio as well. We have resolved that if any of this happens again, we will be taking out a restraining order on the guy, using the new cameras as evidence of his hostile attitude. And the next one is titled "The Pink Elephant with Purple Polka Dots." This story was from a long time ago, around the 50s or early 60s. It is an old childhood story, that of my dad's, and it is centered around my late grandmother. When my father was in his teens, they had a neighbor who was a drunk. Dude had a tendency to get real nasty. According to Dad and my grandmother hated drunks since my grandfather had a drinking habit. During this period, I don't entirely think things like drunk driving or DUI existed, so no one gave a crap. The neighbor had a bit of a nasty habit of constantly parking in areas he shouldn't be. No matter how many times my grandmother tried to reason with him, he would not listen. Well, one day he crossed the line when he parked his car right behind my uncle's car and could not let him out of where he was parked. She tried talking to him, but no dice. That was the final straw for Grandma. Now, before I get into the revenge, here's some things everyone needs to know about dear old Grandma. She sadly passed when I was 7, so I didn't have the chance to get to know her too well. I asked my dad about her a few times, and here's the best way to sum up my grandma. While she was the type of woman who would bake cookies, create lovely art, and make her children and grandchildren gorgeous clothing, she was a woman who literally burnt her bra years ago. She was a complete smartass who, if you wronged her or her family, you would face her wrath. No one would dare mess with her, not even my grandpa or the neighbors. She was a woman ahead of her time. The revenge. Now, where the revenge comes in, my grandmother was so sick of this neighbor's shenanigans, she went to the nearest store and bought a ceramic elephant. Afterwards, she went to the hardware store, bought 2 gallons of paint, pink and purple, and began to paint the elephant. The result was a pink elephant with purple polka dots on the body. Now that the item was finished, every single night when the neighbor would go to the bar, she had my dad lug the elephant onto the front property, wait for him to come home from the bar, completely drunk out of his mind, and see the elephant. The neighbor would stare at it with curiosity and wonder how much he drank before going inside and passing out. The very next morning, possibly around 5 AM, my grandma would wake my dad up and force him to bring the elephant inside the house. Around 8 AM, the neighbor is up, looks out his window, and bam, the elephant was gone. This went on for months. They would pull this every night and day for those few months, and it soon got to a point the neighbor began to question his sanity. The other neighbors did not do anything since most did not know, thought the neighbor was crazy or new, and didn't want to get into the crosshairs. I am not entirely sure what happened, but I think according to Dad, this led the neighbor to quit drinking entirely. As for the elephant, I think my grandpa sold it a year or two after Grandma passed away, along with a few other things that belonged to her. Well guys, rest in peace that grandma, she was definitely a badass. And the last one is titled, Cheating Neighbor Gets Drunk, Picks Fight, Gets Marriage Ruined in the Process. This happened a few years ago, back when I was in high school. I told some of my friends about it and they said I should post it here. Sorry about the formatting, phones suck. A few years back, this guy moved into a duplex next door to my family with his wife and 2 kids. His wife was a quiet, well-mannered woman and their 2 kids were super sweet. This guy, however, was an alcoholic dirtbag who made it a point of being an obnoxious, rude asshat. Over the course of the few years he lived in our neighborhood, he bought and subsequently neglected a dog until it died of exposure, regularly did business with addicts out of his home, 2 of his clients got arrested outside his home for possession of drugs and for child neglect because their young son was left buried under a pile of clothes and trash, and on multiple occasions he would get trashed and bring women home while his wife and kids were visiting relatives in Texas. Eventually his alcoholism started to spiral out of control and he started getting into more and more shouting matches with his wife. My family would stay out of it and actively avoid interfering. There was never any physical violence and we learned from his wife that when other people got involved he would get even worse. For the sake of her and the kids' well-being, we left them alone. There were still instances, however, where we would get pulled into things. This epic bit of revenge came as a result of one such instance. My parents, 2 brothers and I had just gotten back from a family gathering and we were pretty drained from dealing with relatives all day. We pulled in and started unloading all the food from the back of the car when the neighbor's wife and the kids came outside. We thought nothing of it until the dickbag neighbor came screeching out the front door, hurling abuse at his wife and barely able to string coherent sentences together while in his drunken rage. His wife, not wanting to alarm the neighborhood, asks him to stop yelling because the neighbors, my family, were outside. In his stupor, he came to the conclusion that because this fight was happening on his property, it was illegal for us to listen to it. He turns and starts screaming at my father and calling him a fat ass and other terrible names. He then proceeded to walk to the edge of the property line and threatened to kick my dad's ass. To paint you a picture of my dad, he is about 280 pounds of pure FU and does not put up with people treating him like crap. My dad gave his concealed handgun to my mom, calmly walked out to the property line and looked the neighbor dead in the eye. He then gives the neighbor a choice, walk away or to persist and face the consequences of his actions, and the neighbor, being a drunken a-hole, decided to scream at my father, saying stuff like,
"Hit me, you fat bastard, and I will F you up."
Taking that as the answer, my dad looked over at the neighbor's mortified wife and said, "I'm sorry you have to find out this way, but he's been cheating on you." She starts to cry and the neighbor somehow turns redder than he had been mere moments before. His wife quickly put the traumatized kids in the car and sped off, all while her husband begged her to let him explain. After she drove off, he went inside and we don't hear a peep out of him the rest of the night. In the months following this incident, we only saw his wife there a couple of times. In the end, she left him with most of what he owned, including his SUV that he was super proud of. That is all there was to it, and the moral of the story is, don't talk crap to your neighbors or they will ruin your marriage. Hope you all enjoy. And ripe stars, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you still cannot get enough of my content, then I would highly suggest to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will soon show up in the left corner of the screen. In addition, I would really appreciate it if you could not only subscribe to the channel, but also turn on the bell notifications, which you can do by clicking on the little bell icon right next to the subscribe button. This will help my channel tremendously, and this will make sure that you don't miss any of my videos. Furthermore, if you want to see additional ripe content that I don't post on YouTube, then I would suggest to head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive videos that you will not see anywhere else. Thank you so much for your amazing daily support, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.